Yeah, so the view you presented last time concerning Genesis 3:15 simply stated you believe that the satanic seed there in Genesis 3:15 is just our negative influences or bad inclination that must be overcome. Is that correct?
It's just my opinion. It's not definitive. I don't think anyone knows what Genesis chapter 3 means or alludes to. It doesn't say explicitly what it's trying to say. My opinion is just as good as anyone else. The only thing that we do know is that it can't be used as a tool to exclude others from the fold. In other words, like someone can't say that this alludes to something that ultimately drags someone away from Torah. And that's how Christianity uses that verse. It tries to justify an idea that's outside the Torah. In their opinion, an idea of a saving Messiah.
So, with that view, do you hold that the passage has no bearing on a Messiah?
I don't think so. Again, it's just my opinion. Am I certain? I don't think anyone is certain. Because the Torah itself doesn't mention a Messiah, and this is something I'm certain about, at least explicitly.
You're certain that the Torah itself does not?
It doesn't explicitly mention a Messiah. Now, someone could say there are foreshadowings here and there. You could say that about anything. The Mormons say that about Joseph Smith, and the Muslims say that about Muhammad. There are foreshadowings for their prophets. But explicitly, the term the Messiah doesn't appear in the Torah.
All right, I'm so sorry, everyone. And I heard a little part of the rabbi's comment that he felt like essentially it was kind of a time wasting. Did you express sentiments to that effect?
I'm here for the benefit of those listening, but I don't really think that this is helping your cause in any way. Trying to be very decent about it. I don't consider you lost, but you consider me lost. I just consider you an error. But I believe that the Almighty accepts you. Now, you may not extend that courtesy to me. So the least I could do in return is tell you that it just sounds like you're wasting your time. I don't condemn you, nor does my theology condemn you.
Well, that's quite a change of tone from the last time we met. Actually, when we met last time, you felt that I was in gross error, and I, on the other hand, felt like there is room for engagement because you are coming from a stock where you recognize the Torah, and I believe you see a part of the truth, and there's more. There's more. God's knowledge always is on the increase. Adam didn't have perfect knowledge. Otherwise, he would have fallen, or shall we say, Eve didn't have perfect knowledge. He would not have fallen into sin. And throughout the ages, God has been inspiring people with different levels of understanding in His Word. Knowledge shall increase. The Bible tells us that.
So that's where we differ. I think our revelation ends with the book of Deuteronomy. I don't believe in progressive revelation, nor do I think the Torah teaches it.
Well, so very interesting. You don't believe in progressive revelation.
Right.
So it's like a clock that is wound up and it's left to take away. There's no interference, no external divine interference in the human experience.
Between man and God, no. I don't think God has anything new to tell man that He hasn't already told us in the 5 books of Moses.
Oh. All right, so maybe we can explore those dimensions with prayer. It's the Feast of Tabernacles, and I believe as a rabbi, you respect the fact that tabernacles means dwelling. So even in the expression of tabernacles, we find dwelling, and so the Israel dwelt in booths and tabernacles as they went through the wilderness, which look forward to Yahweh said, the Lord, He said, let them build me a tabernacle that I might dwell among them. So tabernacle is this dwelling place, the time of His presence. And we can find in history that there such a dwelling occurred, not just in the wilderness, but in the person of God taking on human form to dwell among us. Let them build me a tabernacle, that's the Torah, that I might dwell among them. So, how fortunate it is for us to be gathered on this day called the Day of Dwelling, the Feast of Booths.
I think,
so,
just to interject a little on what you just said, I think you're losing sight of the vocabulary here. And I know you're reading from an English translation, but the word for dwelling, or what you translate into English as tabernacle in Hebrew, is sukkah. Now, in Exodus 25, verse 8, when the Almighty says, let them build a house for me, that I may dwell with them, some translate that as sanctuary. The word is mikdash. We even say the Beit HaMikdash, the temple. Two completely different words. The King James may translate them both as tabernacle, but it really has nothing to do with the Feast of Tabernacles.
Okay, very good. All right, so, and I appreciate that. I do agree that the word for tabernacles is sukkah, which is a tent, or it means a sukkot for dwelling in, and they dwelt in booths. They even went to a place called Sukkot. But I wanted just to look in Genesis chapter 49. If we would look there, Jacob was giving his blessing upon his children. And I have one hand tonight. I'm trying to navigate through my Bible here. So in Genesis 49, around about verse 10, Jacob was here giving his blessing upon his children. And here we come to chapter 49 and verse 10. He says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh comes. And unto him shall the gathering of the people be. So, from this, the scepter is wielded only by a king. And so it is showing here that the kingship shall not depart from Judah, nor lawgiver, until Shiloh comes. And when Shiloh comes, the people will be gathered to him. So who is this Shiloh who is to rule with a scepter as a king? I believe there's strong biblical evidence that Jacob was seeing well into the future the promised seed who would be the conquering king, the Mashiach, the Messiah, that all Hebrews have been looking and longing for. Would you concur?
No. There's many different interpretations of what they think this is, and this is not really Shiloh. Again, you're reading this in English. This could also mean Sheloh, like belonging to him or due to him.
Somehow, you're coming in choppy. Am I breaking up too? I was very disappointed with the audio quality last time.
Then I'll repeat it. There is no monolithic understanding to this verse. In the Hebrew, it could be formulated in different ways. Even not to say the word Shiloh, it could be Sheloh, to him or belonging to him. Ultimately, that it should be given unto him, what's due to him. This is very hyperbolic. No one, and anyone who's familiar with rabbinic commentaries, could give a definitive answer of what this means or a monolithic understanding of what this means. To the point that this is the verse you hone in on to try to justify what you believe, like many cults do. Cults take hyperbolic, symbolic verses, and they build their whole religion on this, and then on that basis exclude those who disagree with them. Now, this is not intellectually honest. Instead of trying to explain a verse that's clear, something that we know the Almighty is calling us to do, like keep His commandments, that's clear.
We have agreement on those.
So being that no one can agree on this verse, why even use it?
No, I didn't know that we didn't have agreement here. But I use it so that we can have unanimity of thinking, introducing something new. This is an evidence of progressive revelation, which perhaps you will discover in the Torah that reading it once, you didn't get it all. Nor did I. The you is in, a general statement. Third person.
I completely agree that within the 5 books of Moses, the Almighty is constantly giving us insights, more revelation. My statement is that after the book of Deuteronomy, that revelation ended. There's really nothing else the Almighty has to tell us, or even wants to tell us. It only sends us prophets to bring us back to this initial revelation. So I'm not sure how this proves that progressive revelation is in some way alive today, or even during the time of Jesus.
Well, think of it. If Shiloh is a lawgiver that is to come in the future, and the people are to assemble around him, wouldn't Shiloh be bringing additional revelation?
I just said that Shiloh's not a person. That's the way you read it. And of course, many other people, especially those who translated that Bible, interpret it that way. But no one even knows if that formulation of those letters, being that in Hebrew there's no commas, there's no ultimate spaces in the original language, if that's pointing who you think it's pointing to. Now, mind you, I could also give an interpretation accepted by many, that this is the only place in Torah that aligns any form of kingship with the tribe of Judah.
Okay, I'm glad you said that.
So now, that's one understanding. You shouldn't be glad I said that, because I just said that that's just one opinion. In other words, okay. It's not infallible.
Okay, so we will test the fallibility or the infallibility of this teaching here. In the same chapter, I want to jump down to Joseph now, in verse 22 through 24. Joseph is a fruitful bough, even a fruitful bough by a well, whose branches run over the wall. The archers have sorely grieved him, and shot at him, and hated him. But his bow abode in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. From thence is a shepherd, the stone of Israel. Here we find that through Joseph is to come one of strength. His bow abode in strength. And the archers, this is one whom the archers have wounded. It's a wounded shepherd. The arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of... No, I'm sorry. Verse 23, the archers have sorely grieved him and shot at him and hated him. Did this happen to Joseph? Or are we looking forward to a Joseph to come? A shepherd, or a shepherd to come, the stone of Israel, the rock of Israel.
It's interesting how you use verses that appear in the New Testament much, much later, in some way try to tie it in to texts that appear thousands of years before. This is not speaking about some Messiah. This is not even considered prophecy, by the simple fact that Jacob here makes a huge error and says that Shimon and Levi will ultimately not amount to anything. And we know that it was ultimately Levi that became the spiritual head of the children of Israel.
The tribe of Levi. The tribe of Levi. Don't mix them up, the two now.
Well,
you were saying how bloody... Yeah, go ahead, Phil. Finish your thought.
So you're saying here when it's talking about Judah, it's only talking about Judah the individual?
No,
not the tribe of Judah?
It's forward-looking. No.
Right.
How do you understand? And where's the passage? Let me see the verse you have under consideration. Simeon and Levi in verse 5?
Absolutely. With Simeon and Levi are brethren, weapons of violence their kingship. In other words, he's prophesying that they would remain in this manner.
Okay, so if you look at it, and the beauty of this passage here is that it shows different characters as well. So if you went on, like in verse 7, it says, "Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I'll divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel." So this was a prophecy of a curse toward their anger, not curse on them per se.
This is a definitive outlook on Levi and Shimon. Now we know Levi was never cursed with any bouts of anger. It's funny how you miss this portion and build your religion off the following 3 verses as pointing to some future Messiah. I don't even see that this is even referring to end of days. Where it says end of days in English just means in a time to come in Hebrew. It's hard to discuss these verses with Christians because you're reading from their Christian Bible. It's formulated to always point to the Messiah, and no matter what page.
It seems as though it's hard for you because it's hard in the Hebrew mind. There's not even any extant commentaries on this you stated earlier. So these are so-called difficult passages that the Bible simplifies when we recognize that there is a promised Messiah, a promised seed, a promised king. I mean, just looking at the passage under consideration in verse 10, scepters are only used by kings. So this is speaking of a king that should come through Judah. He should be the lion of the tribe of Judah, as it were.
And there are many kings that came through Judah, correct?
The kingship came through Judah for the 2-tribe kingdom, or the 3-tribe kingdom. And speaking of Levi or Levi, you realize that he was not given a possession as such. They were not recognized as a tribe that had possession.
But that wasn't as a curse.
No, that was a blessing.
I don't know if it was a blessing. Their job was to roam amongst all the tribes, but mainly to inhabit the temple area. They were the teachers of Israel.
Exactly.
If your goal is just to go through these esoteric verses that really are not telling us anything directly and then try to prove what you believe,
no,
that's exactly what you're doing. You're not really convincing anyone. I'm just saying go by the literal understanding of the text, and all you're doing is pointing to esoteric passages that ultimately don't go anywhere. You're building your religion on an unstable foundation because you don't even know exactly what it means. You're telling me what you think it means. Of course, in faith, you may believe that anything points to Jesus, but you know that it's not in the literal text. On the day of judgment, you think God's going to buy your interpretation? Saying, well, this is pointing to this and that is pointing to this. And while the Jew is just reading exactly what the Torah says, the portions that make sense. We know in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 28, God says that the secret things, the things that you're trying to decipher are for God, and only the things that are revealed, things that man can understand, are for us and our children. But for some reason, any verse you point to in Torah speaks about Jesus. It's kind of silly. It's not real. You understand? You're living in a fantasy world. Prove your religion from actual verses that you understand, that we can both agree on.
No, these are verses that you don't understand, and this is a travesty, if at all, is that you're not willing to open your understanding to see them differently, because you have admitted that these are highly symbolic, hyperbole that hardly anyone understands. Maybe
that one verse
does not understand, not this one verse, but I took you down to the other verses where we further amplified that through Joseph now, the archer is going to smite Joseph. The archer, somebody is going to pierce a descendant of Joseph. And he will also be known as a shepherd and the rock of Israel. So we are still seeing this progression of thought that there's somebody out there who is to come.
So was Jesus a descendant of Joseph?
Both. He was both a descendant of Joseph as well as a descendant of David, of Judah.
How?
This is the beauty of it all.
Well, tell me.
This is why
Joseph's
I
tribe
bring this to your attention here.
Got split into two. I'm just saying, you make these statements. I don't think you're thinking about what you're saying. Manasseh and Ephraim.
No, here's one moment there. The ass, and this is Hebrew. This is in your own. There's the ass, and that is a symbol of the Messiah. And also there is the limb. That is a symbol of the Messiah.
I've never heard of this. I never heard that a donkey is a symbol of the Messiah.
Father, help me to find that. I perhaps could put my fingers on it.
Now, I'm familiar with the verse, Christianity interprets in the prophets that your king comes to you lonely and riding on a donkey. That doesn't mean that the donkey is a symbol of a Messiah.
No. In Hebrew literature, I want to see here. That's something we can parking lot. But I wanted, I thought it would have been familiar to you, so I didn't decide to bring it here. But this is a very familiar theme in the Targum, as well as other writings, Hebrew writings. So I will be sure to share that.
In Hebrew, donkey is an insult. To call someone a chamor typically means like a jackass. It's not.
Okay.
I thought we're here trying to justify what we believe with Torah, not foreshadowing.
Torah, and
you're using foreshadowing. How do you expect for me to respond to your interpretation of what you think a verse means?
Okay. Let's go to another passage. But before I go there, I just want to leave it for the record. I did not interpret. I simply pointed out that scepters are wielded only by kings. So whoever Shiloh is, he is a king. This king is to come from the tribe of Judah. That's what verse 10 tells us. And also the world, the people, are to gather to him. The world, all assemblies must converge on this Messianic king, or this Shiloh king. We see that he's also known as the rock, or the stone of Israel,
here.
And the shepherd of Israel.
No, hold on. It didn't say the world. I mean, you're really, it's kind of silly.
The people.
Right, the people could be the people of Israel. Why are you trying to paint this as some end of days messianic figure that the world's going to bow to? This isn't even a debate anymore. You're speaking in faith.
Okay.
Everything you're telling me is in faith.
I will go.
We have to discuss things that we could both agree upon. If you're only going to point to esoteric passages and tell me this is what it means, and if you don't see it, then I'm the blind one, I guess, it's kind of silly.
Okay. Numbers chapter 24. Beginning at verse 14. And I think this is as clear as language can make it. And we'll take it down, Numbers 24 from verse 14. Yeah. Now, so here we know the story of how Balaam was hired by Balak to curse Israel. And he, on 3 occasions, tried to curse Israel and only pronounced blessings. And now, in frustration, he stood up by Mount Pisgah, and he's now going to proclaim a parable/prophecy. So verse 15 actually picks up. No, verse 14 says, "Now behold, I go to my people. Come therefore, and I will advertise thee. I will broadcast to you, Balak, what this people, Israel, shall do to thy people, the Amorites, in the latter days." You say it's in days to come, and that's very well. But this has some terminal value that extends to the end of time. So it didn't happen in that day. So Balaam is going to now announce what Israel will do to the enemies of Israel in the latter days. It continues, verse 15. "And he took up his parable and said, Balaam the son of Beor hath said, and the man whose eyes are open hath said, he hath said, which heard the words of God and knew the knowledge of the Most High, which saw the vision of the Almighty falling into a trance, but having his eyes open." And here's the power. "I shall see him." Do you notice that it's always this masculine seed, if you will? "I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh." That means it's a far-off time. "There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter," here's that scepter again, "a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab, and destroy all the children of Sheth. And Edom shall be a possession, Seir also shall be a possession for his enemies, and Israel shall do valiantly. Out of Jacob shall come he that shall have dominion, and shall destroy him that remaineth of the city." Here's another passage. This is a prophecy that projects some time in the distant future from when Balaam prophesied that one wielding a scepter will come out of Jacob, and this time identified as a star.
Can I respond?
Go ahead.
Tell me, when did Jesus ever defeat Moab or the Amalekites? Because anyone familiar with Jewish history knows that this is clearly talking about David. 2 Samuel chapter 8, verse 2. David defeats the Moabites. Samuel chapter 30. David defeats the Amalekites. And this is how virtually every rabbi has always interpreted this whole chapter to be pointing to. The star is David.
Okay, I see. All right, so let's test that. So first of all, we say the star is David, this entire thing, the scepter and such, that's pointing to King David. So at least we agree that it's pointing to a king. But let's see if David is that king or if it's another David to come. See, there are two Davids in Scripture.
There's no more kingdom of Moab, David, and there's no more Amalek. So if that's pointing to someone else, I guess his prophecy expired.
No, I think you asked a very good question, and the answer is in the Scriptures, because this did not occur at Christ's first advent. So, but it must be fulfilled. And if you think it, the kingdom of Moab, the Moabites and the Ammonites, their descendants are here with us today. They did not go through a genocidal cleansing. Their descendants are here today. This is a promise of the Messiah's establishing his kingdom. And the lands of the Moabites and the Amalekites will be taken over by him, by his kingdom. And he said it's in the latter days, not in David's days. Verse 4 is clear. I will show you what this people will do to your people in the latter days. And to emphasize that, to test whether or not this could have been ancient David, is to look just a little closer.
Just let me translate that word for you before you go any further. There, where you translate the latter days.
The time to come.
Okay. Which just in Hebrew means in the future. That could be a day from now. Be'aharit hayamim. Be'aharit means later or in coming days. Hayamim. I'm not sure if your Bible translates it as ends of days.
I agree with you.
And also we know there's a verse here that says that this king also subdues Edom. What other king subdued Moab, Amalek, Edom? Only King David. Why do you look further?
Because David told us to look further. When King David came, he realized that he did not fulfill this role. And David, prophet King David, told us to look further. That's why I said to you that there is the ancient David king. Yes, he was a type of the king to come, another Davidic king. And so let's.
And you believe this in faith. You're making
no. This is
statements of faith.
Go to the text.
You're telling me that faith. Okay, it's faith that you believe that King David himself felt he didn't fulfill this, and he told us to look for someone else based on this chapter. This is your interpretation.
No.
You're used to speaking to people who are born in the church and they don't question. But you're not going to convince a Jew or someone who doesn't know the New Testament and only knows what you call the Old Testament or Tanakh. You're not going to convince them that this chapter is talking about Jesus. It's clearly interpreted by virtually all the rabbis, this to be pointing to King David.
And I agree that David would fit in a typological way. But the star, when the Magi saw the star, they knew that the star of Bethlehem had arrived. David was in Bethlehem as well. So David is a type of the David to come. And he said it in so many words. In 2 Samuel chapter 7, King David, articulated this very thought. He wanted to build a tabernacle, a house for God. And he was very ambitious in doing this. The Lord said something to David, and David responded also. In 2 Samuel chapter 7, It's really from verse 4. 4 through 17 is where the entire truth of this lies. And I'm not going to spend the time to read all those verses, but I wanted to at least build the foundation by looking at verses 4 through 6 first, and then we can jump later down. It says, and it came to pass that night, and so David wanted to build this temple. That's in verse 1. He said, it came to pass when the king sat in his house that the Lord had given him rest round about from all his enemies, that the king, David that is, said unto Nathan the prophet, see now I dwell in a house of cedar, but the ark of God dwelleth within curtain. And so he desired now to build a temple to the Lord. And so verse 5 picks up, and the Lord appeared to Nathan and said, go tell my servant David, thus saith the Lord, shalt thou build me an house for me to dwell in? And so he told him, no, you will not do that. A descendant of yours will. Now verse 8, now therefore so shalt thou say unto my servant David, thus saith the Lord of hosts, Yahweh, I took thee from the sheepcote, from following the sheep, to be ruler over my people Israel. And I was with thee whithersoever thou wentest, and I have cut off all thine enemies out of thy sight. And verse 11, moreover, I will appoint a place for my people Israel. Now we're seeing the future projection. In fact, let's look in verse 9 again. I was with thee whithersoever thou wentest, and have cut off all thine enemies out of thy sight, and have made thee a great name, like unto the name of the great men that are in the earth. Moreover, I will appoint a place, that's future, for my people Israel, and will plant them, that they may dwell in a place of their own. Now, David was in the promised land. They were there in Bethlehem, Judah. Yet God would say, I will in the future appoint them a place to dwell in. And moreover, neither shall the children of wickedness afflict them any more as before time. So they went through afflictions. After David's day, Israel went through all sorts of afflictions, but they were looking forward to a time, a place, an experience when they will never again be oppressed by the enemy. Go on in verse 11.
Hold on. Just let me respond to this.
Yes.
This whole chapter is pointing to King Solomon, that the temple would be placed or built on the place that the Almighty will choose, or ultimately has chose already in this chapter, which was Jerusalem. So all you have to do is look forward 30 years for this to be established. I'm not sure what you're referring to. Are they pointing to the establishment of Jesus' body?
No, I'll explain. So I agree with you that this has a typological application to Solomon, but then there is a greater Solomon to come. The antitypical, just like there's an antitypical David, there's an antitypical Solomon. Solomon is a type of a Solomon to come. Solomon really means the son of peace. So there is to be the Prince of Peace. And Solomon was a king, and his name was Peace, and so there is to be a king of peace.
This hermeneutic law used by Christians of double interpretation doesn't exist amongst the Jews. We don't believe that one text could be saying two different things. Now, we may not agree on what a text is actually saying, so we could have different opinions on what it is possibly saying, but we don't believe that a prophecy or a statement could have two interpretations. In other words, you believe that every prophecy that appears in the Old Testament has an application to the people of that day as well as to the coming of Jesus. Now, that's very convenient, which is why every generation nowadays, especially in the Christian world, feels that they're the last generation. And they try to reapply every one of the biblical prophecies to today.
Are you looking forward to the coming of Messiah?
I'm looking forward to a king being established, as it states in Deuteronomy chapter 17. Now,
very good. All right, I want to dwell on this just for a little more. Verse 13. Verse 12. And when thy days be fulfilled, and thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, I will set up thy seed after thee, which is thy son, or descendant, which shall proceed out of thy bowels, I will establish his kingdom. He shall build an house for my name, and I will establish a throne of his kingdom forever. Notice it, there's an important underscore here, that the throne of this kingdom is to last not for time, but for eternity, forever. I will be his father, and he should...
In Hebrew,
excuse me?
In Hebrew, leolam, what you're interpreting there doesn't mean eternity. There's no word for eternity in Hebrew. It just means for a long time. As you know, later on, this same throne becomes temporal and conditional to Solomon staying on the right path.
I will demonstrate to you a little more, though. I will show you something that perhaps you hadn't seen before, and I think you'll agree that you hadn't seen this before. So I'm just going to go down to verse 16. I will be his father, that God will be his father, the son of David. God is going to be his father. I, Yahweh, the Lord, will be his father, and he shall be my son. If there's a conditional if here, if he commit iniquity, I will chasten him with a rod of men and the stripes of the children of men, which tells us that it was possible for Christ to have fallen, but he didn't. It goes on in 15.
Because this is not talking about Christ, or who you call Christ. This is talking about Solomon.
Okay. All right. Just to show that this is not speaking about Solomon, verse 16 says, and thine house and thy kingdom shall be established forever before thee. Thy throne shall be established forever. Now, I want to pick this for a long time. Okay. Let's see how long a time. About 80 years after, the entire system was a free-for-all giveaway, until it ended up in Babylon. The Medes and the Persians had it. The Grecians had it. And the Romans took it. And it's still not in the hands of any lineage of David until this day.
Because it was conditional. It was conditional on King Solomon walking on the right path. We know that his wives led him astray, but Israel didn't fall for some time. The kingdom was split into two, and
I'm saying that, as I stated earlier, that Solomon, his name means peace. He was also a king, so essentially was king of peace. Typically,
the reason
he was
he's called Shlomo is because during his reign, Israel didn't fight any wars. Exactly. It was a time of peace. That doesn't mean that it's pointing to the existence of Jesus. I mean, someone whose very existence caused more wars in the name of the God that he was in some way defending than any other king that came before him.